The cold Montana winter was unforgiving, especially for Sarah Mitchell. She sat huddled in the front seat of her old station wagon, the engine barely sputtering to life, the frost on the windows a harsh reminder of how far she'd fallen. 6 months ago, she had been a hopeful nursing student, her future bright, her mother by her side. But death had taken her mother, and with it, her sense of stability. Medical bills piled up, then the eviction notice arrived. Each day felt like a battle just to survive. Sarah had spent the last few nights parked in the lot of a small diner, using the gas station bathroom to wash up when she could, keeping her head down, counted her last few dollars like a person on the edge of a cliff. This morning, she had no choice but to keep moving. A glance at the bulletin board in the diner caught her eye. A flyer. Caregiver needed for elderly woman. Room and board included. Coltrane Ranch, 15 miles north. It was a long shot, but it was a shot nonetheless. Sarah took a deep breath and borrowed the diner's phone. She dialed the number, her fingers trembling slightly as the line rang. The voice that answered was gruff, sharp. "You got experience?" "I was in nursing school before." She began, her words hanging in the air. "Before what?" He cut her off, his tone more accusing than curious. "Before life got in the way," Sarah replied quietly. There was a long pause before the man spoke again, this time with a softer edge. "Be here tomorrow at dawn. Don't be late." Sarah hung up the phone, staring at the piece of paper in her hands. A small part of her hoped this would be the break she so desperately needed. The next morning, Sarah drove up the winding road to Coltrane Ranch, her station wagon bouncing over uneven gravel. The ranch was far from glamorous, its old buildings showing the wear of years, but the land was vast and beautiful. The snow-covered mountains loomed in the distance, the quiet of the countryside settling around her. As she pulled up to the ranch house, she noticed a man standing near the front door, his arms crossed as he watched her car approach. Jake Coltrane, the ranch owner, looked like the kind of man who'd seen his share of hardship. He was in his early 30s, his face weathered by the sun, his posture tense with skepticism. "You the one from the diner?" he asked, his eyes scanning her ragged clothes and the tired look in her eyes. "Yes, sir," Sarah replied, stepping out of the car. Her legs felt unsteady as she walked toward him, but she held her head high. Jake didn't offer a smile, just a curt nod as he led her inside. The house was simple, nothing fancy, but warm. As Sarah followed Jake through the narrow hallway, she was introduced to his grandmother, Martha Coltrane. Martha was sitting in an armchair by the fire, a blanket draped over her frail legs. Her face was lined with age, her hair thin and silver, but there was an intensity in her eyes, a sharpness that belied her physical frailty. She looked up at Sarah, her gaze piercing as if she could see straight through her. "You come closer, dear," Martha said softly, her voice stronger than Sarah expected. Sarah stepped closer, unsure of what to expect. Martha studied her for a moment, then asked in a whisper, "What's your mother's name?" "Rebecca. Rebecca Mitchell. She passed 6 months ago." The room grew silent. Martha's eyes widened for a brief moment, a flicker of recognition passing through them before she quickly masked it. She took Sarah's hand, her grip firm, and held it for a long moment. "You have your mother's eyes." "Exactly her eyes," Martha said, her voice soft but filled with emotion. The words lingered in the room, and Sarah felt a strange stirring deep in her chest. The name Rebecca felt heavy in the air. "She's hired," Martha declared suddenly, interrupting the silence. "No need for an interview. She's the one." Jake opened his mouth to protest, but caught Martha's steely gaze. With a heavy sigh, he nodded. "I suppose that settles it then." Sarah stood frozen, unsure of what had just happened, but something inside her stirred, a strange mix of relief and curiosity. The first few days passed in a blur. Sarah moved into a small room in the house, one of the few spare bedrooms. It was cozy, but nothing luxurious. She spent her days helping Martha with her daily routine, medications, light physical therapy, and meal preparations. Sarah found herself working hard, but feeling strangely fulfilled. She was good at this, much better than she had expected, and it felt like she was starting to find a rhythm again. Despite her competence, Jake kept his distance, watching from afar. His eyes were always assessing, calculating, but his attitude slowly softened over time. He saw how Sarah interacted with his grandmother, how she knew exactly how to calm Martha's temper and keep her comfortable. He also watched as Sarah pitched in around the ranch. She wasn't afraid of hard work, whether it was repairing a broken fence or helping with the horses. But Sarah noticed something odd. Martha often spoke about a girl who lived here long ago. The woman in her stories sounded eerily familiar. She loved this place, left too soon, broke a good man's heart, Martha would say, showing Sarah old photographs of the woman, though she never said her name. One evening, after dinner, Sarah was cleaning up when an old newspaper clipping slipped from behind the dresser. It had been tucked in the back corner, almost as if someone had placed it there on purpose. The headline caught her eye. Local nurse vanishes. Family search continues. The date was from 1955, and in the photo was a young woman who looked strikingly like Sarah. Her heart raced as she stared at the image. Was this her mother? The next morning, Sarah could no longer ignore the question. She confronted Martha with the clipping. Who is this woman? Why does she look like me? Martha took a deep breath, her hands shaking slightly as she motioned for Sarah to sit down. Sit down, child. It's time for some truth. The silence between them stretched, and Sarah's heart raced as Martha slowly began to speak. The woman in the photo is Rebecca in Whitmore, your mother. She was here over 30 years ago as a caregiver for James Coltrane, Jake's father. Rebecca came from a wealthy Portland family, studying nursing. She and James fell in love, and they were planning to marry. But then Rebecca got pregnant. When her family found out, they came for her in the dead of night, forced her to leave, and paid her to disappear. She was told to never contact James again. Sarah's eyes widened in shock, her world crumbling around her. But why didn't she tell me? She never said a word about this. Martha sighed deeply, her eyes filled with sorrow. She was young, afraid, and her family pressured her. They promised her a future away from all of this, paid for her schooling, gave her a new life. Sarah's mind raced. She told me my father died before I was born, but it was all a lie. Martha nodded, her voice barely a whisper. Sometimes people lie to protect themselves from pain. But your mother never stopped loving James, even after she left. And you, Sarah, you found us, just like your mother said you would. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she processed the weight of Martha's words. How could everything she knew be a lie? But there was more. As Martha reached in her drawer and pulled out an envelope, sealed and worn with age. Your mother knew. Before she died, she sent me this letter asking me to guide you back here, to bring you to the ranch. She knew you'd need to know the truth. Martha handed her the letter, and Sarah felt her hands tremble as she opened it. The words were raw, heartfelt, written in her mother's unmistakable handwriting, confessing regret and longing for the life she had given up. The letter revealed a deep yearning to return to the ranch, to the love she had lost, and to the child she had been forced to abandon. As Sarah read, she felt the presence of her mother's spirit surround her, guiding her back to the place she had never known but somehow felt drawn to. But the discovery left Sarah conflicted, torn between a life she had built and a family she had never known. As she folded the letter, a new weight settled in her chest. The realization that her mother's life, Her own life was now tied to this ranch and the family that had once been lost to them. Meanwhile, Martha's intentions became clearer. She had orchestrated everything, placed the notice, and hoped Sarah would come, bringing with her the very truth that had been buried for decades. But Sarah could feel the weight of Martha's manipulations, and her heart was heavy with the knowledge that she had been a pawn in a larger scheme. Jake, who had been listening from the doorway, entered, his face tight with anger. "You planned this?" "All of it," he asked, his voice low, barely controlled. "Yes, I did," Martha admitted without hesitation. "I wanted Sarah to have the life her mother should have had." Jake stepped back, his frustration turning to disbelief. "And you didn't think to tell me? That my whole life was part of some plan you set in motion?" The conversation spiraled into chaos, with Sarah caught between anger and hurt. She turned to Martha, seeking answers. "Did you know I was coming?" Martha met her gaze, her expression sorrowful. "I hoped. I didn't know for certain until I saw your face. Your mother sent me photos every year. She wanted me to know what James had lost." Sarah's mind spun as she tried to process the enormity of the situation. The deep web of lies and secrets, woven together by years of manipulation, now stood before her. "So what now?" she asked, her voice shaking. Jake, who had been silent for a long moment, finally spoke. "I don't know how to fix this," he said, his eyes conflicted. "But I do know this. I want you to stay. I don't care about the past or who orchestrated it. I just need you here." There was a long pause, and Sarah's heart clenched. "But you don't even know who I am," she said softly. "But my mother was." Jake reached for her, his hands gentle. "I don't need to. I know what you are to me, Sarah. I know that this is real." The tension in the room hung heavy as Sarah tried to process everything that had been laid bare. But as she looked at Jake, standing there with all the pain and love in his eyes, she realized that, despite the complexity of it all, she was already too deep to walk away. The connection between them was undeniable, stronger than the past, stronger than the manipulations that had brought them together. But the storm inside Sarah was far from over. She needed time to think, time to process what this new reality meant for her future. As the sun set over the ranch that night, Sarah knew that she was standing at a crossroads, and the choices she made now would echo through the rest of her life. She had come to Montana seeking a new start, but now she was discovering that the past was far more intertwined with her future than she could have ever imagined. And as she left Jake standing in the doorway, she knew that neither of them could go back to who they were before. The morning after the revelation hit Sarah like a freight train, Jake sat at the kitchen table, his face pale, his hands trembling as he read the letter. His brows furrowed deeper, his mouth tightening into a grim line. Sarah, standing in the doorway, watched him quietly, sensing something was wrong, but not daring to ask just yet. Then Jake spoke, his voice low and strained. "We're in trouble." His words were like a blow to Sarah's chest. He handed her the letter without another word. The words on the page hit her like a cold gust of wind. The ranch was being foreclosed. The bank was demanding $200,000 within the next 60 days, or everything they had worked for, everything Jake's family had built for generations, would be lost. It's the medical bills from Martha's stroke, the drought these past 2 years. I should have told you sooner. Jake's voice cracked with a mixture of shame and defeat. Sarah felt the weight of the moment settle in her chest. How could she have known? She had been so wrapped up in the whirlwind of discovering the truth about her mother, the history that had been hidden from her, and the strange bond she was beginning to form with Jake, that she hadn't seen the cracks in the foundation of their world. The ranch wasn't just a place. It was Jake's legacy, a connection to a family that had been rooted in these lands for decades. And now it was all slipping away out of their grasp. Why didn't you say something earlier? Sarah asked, her voice quieter than she intended. She felt the sting of her own words, but couldn't stop herself. Jake met her eyes, his expression pained. Pride, stupidity, and I didn't want you to worry. Sarah looked down at the letter again, the figures and the thread of foreclosure spinning in her mind. The ranch was more than a place. It was a symbol of everything that had been lost, everything that Martha had clung to for so many years. And now it was slipping away. Before she could say anything more, Martha wheeled herself into the kitchen, her sharp eyes instantly catching the tension in the air. What's this? What's the news? Jake hesitated, his gaze flickering to Sarah before he spoke. It's bad. We need $200,000 or we lose the ranch. Martha's expression didn't change, but Sarah saw the flicker of worry in her eyes. How long do we have? Sarah asked, her voice sounding stronger than she felt. 60 days, Jake muttered, his hand clenching into a fist. And I have no idea where to get that kind of money. Don't sell it, Martha said suddenly, her voice fierce. I won't let you. We'll find another way. Sarah looked at her, confused. But how? Where can we possibly come up with that much money in that short of time? Martha's eyes softened as she looked from Sarah to Jake. There's a way, she said quietly. Your mother's family, the Whitmores, they owe us. They owe your mother, and they owe you. You need to go to them. Jake shook his head, his face tightening with anger. I don't want money from them, Martha. I won't take it from them. You know what they did to Rebecca. I don't care what they did, Martha snapped, surprising Sarah with the vehemence in her voice. They took your mother away, they broke their promises, and they took your family from you. But they owe us now. They owe this ranch. And if you don't ask for help, I will. Sarah's heart skipped a beat at the forcefulness of Martha's words. She had never seen this side of her before, the sharp, unyielding side that refused to be ignored. Sarah's right, Jake said quietly, his voice softer now. We can't just ask for money. They don't owe us anything. They made their choice. And they can make it right, Martha shot back. They're rich, Jake. They have the money to save this ranch and more. They need to help us. If you won't ask, I will. Sarah stood silently, the weight of the conversation sinking in. She hadn't even thought of her mother's family in years. They had never been a part of her life, not after Rebecca had left Montana all those years ago. But now, with the ranch in jeopardy and their future hanging by a thread, the Whitmores were the only chance they had. After a long, heavy silence, Sarah made a decision. I'll go, she said, her voice firm despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. I'll go to Portland. I'll see them, but I'll do it on my terms. I'll ask for help, but I won't beg. I'll go to them for the ranch, for the future, not for any of their pity or charity. Jake looked at her, his face conflicted but filled with respect. You don't have to do this, Sarah. I'll find another way. But Sarah shook her head. No, we've all been living in the shadow of the past for too long. This is our chance to take control of our future. I won't let this ranch die because of pride or shame. We'll go to them, and we'll get what we need to save it. Jake didn't speak again, but the look in his eyes told Sarah everything she needed to know. He was willing to follow her. They would go together. The next day, after packing their things and making arrangements, Sarah and Jake boarded a bus for Portland, the 18-hour journey stretching out before them like a long road to a future neither of them could fully grasp. During the long ride, they talked. The tension between them had lessened, and for the first time in days, they found themselves laughing and sharing stories about their childhoods, their hopes, their regrets. Sarah listened as Jake spoke about his father, James, who had loved Rebecca with a depth she hadn't expected. James had never remarried after Rebecca's departure, and he had kept her picture by his bed until the day he died. He never stopped loving her, Jake admitted softly. And I guess in a way, neither did I. He always talked about her like she'd just gone off to school, like she was going to come back any day. Sarah could hear the pain in his voice, but she also heard the love that had never wavered. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. If she had stayed, things could have been so different. "Maybe," Jake said with a shrug. "But we wouldn't be here if things had gone differently. And maybe this is how it was always meant to be. Maybe I had to go through all of this to be ready to fight for what really matters." Sarah looked at him, her heart swelling with something deeper than sympathy. It was admiration, respect, and maybe, just maybe, it was love. When they finally arrived in Portland, the Whitmore estate felt like stepping into another world. The mansion was massive, the gates high and imposing, and the manicured lawns spoke of wealth that felt foreign to Sarah. A butler led them inside, where they were taken to the study to meet Charles Whitmore, the family patriarch. The man was old, but his sharp eyes seemed to see through her, as though he knew exactly what she wanted. "So," Charles said, his voice cold, his gaze unyielding. "You came for money, I assume." "I came for what's right," Sarah answered, her voice steady. "You owe this ranch. You owe my family." Evelyn Whitmore, Charles's wife, stood in the corner, her eyes never leaving Sarah, her gaze filled with regret and something else, something that felt like longing. "You look just like her," Evelyn murmured, her voice soft and broken. "Rebecca was a fool," Charles said, his voice biting. "She could have had everything. Instead, she chose this." He motioned vaguely towards Sarah and Jake. "But we're not here for the past. What do you want?" Sarah steadied herself. "I want the money to save this ranch. We need $200,000. There was a long silence before Charles spoke again. "We'll give you the money, but there's something else we need in return." The tension in the Whitmore estate was thick, almost suffocating as Sarah sat across from Charles and Evelyn, their cold eyes trained on her. She had come all the way to Portland, seeking a lifeline for Jake and the ranch, and now it seemed like she was about to face another test of her resolve. "We'll give you the money," Charles said, his voice flat, devoid of warmth. "But we want something in return." Sarah felt a knot form in her stomach. It was too easy, too smooth, and she knew better than to think they were doing this purely out of some sense of duty. "What do you want?" she asked, keeping her tone steady, her back straight. Evelyn's eyes seemed to soften for a moment, and she finally spoke, her voice trembling. "We want to be in your life," she said, her gaze dropping to the floor as if she couldn't bear to meet Sarah's eyes. "As grandparents. We should have been all these years. We should have been there for you, and we want to make that right." Sarah blinked, the words cutting through her like a sharp wind. She hadn't expected this. She had come seeking money, not an emotional plea. Her mother had cut ties with these people for a reason. She had spent her life learning to live without them, without the Whitmore's presence in her life. But now, they were offering something she didn't know how to handle: acceptance. A family she had never known. "You think you could just walk in and take that place?" Sarah said, her voice colder now. "You can't buy my love, and you can't buy my forgiveness. You don't get to come back into my life because you want to feel better about the past." Charles opened his mouth to respond, but Sarah raised a hand to stop him. "I didn't come here for any of this. I came here for the ranch, to save it, not to repair broken relationships I didn't ask for." There was a long silence as the Whitmores exchanged a glance, a heavy, unspoken understanding passing between them. Finally, Evelyn spoke again, her voice quieter this time, almost pleading. "We've been living with regret for 30 years. We've known the pain we caused. Every year, we received those photos from Rebecca of you, Sarah. We saw you grow up, and we never did anything about it. We never reached out. We thought we could just keep pretending, keep living in our world, and it would be okay." Evelyn's words were like a cold wind brushing against Sarah's heart. And for the first time, She found herself questioning her own emotions. She didn't want to forgive them. She didn't know if she could. But they had hurt her mother, and in a way, they had hurt her too. The weight of the years of abandonment, the silence that had stretched between them, made it hard to think clearly. "You can't undo what's been done," Sarah said, her voice softer now, but no less resolute. "But that doesn't mean I'm going to let this ranch die. And it doesn't mean I'll let you buy your way back into my life." She paused, her chest tightening. "If you want to be a part of it, you'll have to earn it. You won't get to control me, and you'll have to help save the ranch. That's my condition. Take it or leave it." Charles's lips tightened as he listened, but after a moment of silence, he nodded. "Agreed," he said simply. "All of it." Sarah stood, feeling the heaviness of the conversation settle over her. This wasn't easy. There was no fairy tale resolution here, no neatly tied up ending. But there was a chance for something new, a chance to rebuild what had been broken. The Whitmores may have been a part of her past, but Sarah was learning to shape her future one step at a time. Jake, who had been quiet throughout the conversation, now stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder, his support a silent but steady presence. "We've got the money," he said, his voice steady and sure. "We can save the ranch, but it's going to be up to us to make it work. We got to do this together." Sarah looked at him, her heart swelling with emotions she hadn't expected. It wasn't just the ranch. It was him, the man who had been there for her, even when everything seemed impossible. She had been brought to Montana by fate, a series of events that had led her here to this ranch to him. And now, she realized she wasn't just fighting for the ranch. She was fighting for them, for their future. But before she could speak, Charles interrupted again. "We'll send the money," he said, his tone more neutral than before. "But there's something else we need to show you. Something your mother left with us. Something for Martha." Sarah frowned, her curiosity piqued. "What is it?" she asked. "It's in the study," Evelyn said softly, standing up from her seat. "We'll bring it to you." Charles led the way to the study, his footsteps heavy, the silence between them palpable. When they entered, Sarah noticed an old, worn box resting on the desk. It was a simple thing, unassuming, with a few faded papers sticking out of the top. "Rebecca left this with us before she passed away," Charles explained, his voice softer now. "She said it was for Martha and her daughter when the time was right." Sarah approached the box cautiously, unsure of what to expect. She opened it slowly, revealing several letters, some photos, and a small velvet box tucked in the corner. She picked up the letters first, her hands trembling as she unfolded one of them. Rebecca's handwriting was familiar to her, even though she had never seen it before. "I knew one day you'd find your way home," the letter began. "To the ranch, to Jake's son, to the love I was too weak to fight for." As Sarah read on, her heart ached with the depth of her mother's regret. Rebecca had never stopped loving James. She had never stopped loving the ranch. And in this letter, she was acknowledging the life she had left behind, the life she had abandoned for the sake of fear and shame. And yet, in this letter, there's also a sense of forgiveness, a sense of closure that Sarah didn't realize she needed. The box also contained old photographs, ones that Sarah recognized from the ones Martha had shown her. But these were different. These were the photos her mother had sent to the Whitmores. Photos of Sarah growing up, of milestones and birthdays, of moments Rebecca had never shared with her. The last thing Sarah found in the box was the velvet box, and when she opened it, she gasped. Inside was a simple, handmade engagement ring, the kind that James Coltrane would have made. The note beside it was written in James's handwriting. "For Rebecca, when she comes back." The ring was simple, unadorned, but it was beautiful in its raw, handmade nature. And Sarah felt a lump form in her throat as she realized the depth of the love that had been lost, the love that had been waiting for all these years. He never stopped waiting. Martha said quietly from the doorway, her voice thick with emotion, "Your father, he made this himself for your mother. He always believed she would come back." Sarah held the ring in her hand, her fingers trembling as the weight of the past settled over her. This ring, this symbol of love, had waited for 30 years to be placed on her mother's finger. And now it was hers to hold. As she slipped the ring onto her finger, she felt a connection to her mother, to James, and to the ranch. It was as if the past had come full circle, completing a story that had been broken long ago. She turned to find Jake standing behind her, his eyes focused on the ring. "You don't have to wear it," he said quietly, his voice strained with emotion. I wanted you to have it, if it meant something to you." Sarah smiled softly, her heart full of gratitude and understanding. "It means something to me," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "It means that love, even when it's lost, can find its way back." The sun hung low in the sky, casting a soft golden light across the ranch as the preparations for Sarah and Jake's wedding day began. It was a simple ceremony, nothing extravagant, just a gathering of close friends, family, and the ranch's community. The meadow where they'd chosen to marry was a patch of land Sarah had come to love, with wildflowers growing freely and the distant mountains looming like silent witnesses to the moments about to unfold. There was a sense of peace in the air, a quiet anticipation that seemed to settle over everyone present. The Whitmores had agreed to come, but they kept their distance, standing at the back, respectful but not intruding. They hadn't earned a place up front, and Sarah had made it clear she didn't need them to play a central role in her day. The ceremony was for her, Jake, and the people who had stood by them, through thick and thin. As Sarah stepped into the small clearing where the ceremony would take place, the soft breeze tugged at her hair, and the wildflowers swayed gently in the wind. She wore a simple white dress, one she had found at a secondhand store, but to her, it was more beautiful than anything expensive. The dress was a symbol of everything she had fought for, the life she had created with Jake, the love they had found despite the odds, and the life they would now build together. She carried a small bouquet of wildflowers she had picked that morning from the ranch, a reminder of her roots, of the land that had once been foreign to her, but was now her home. As she walked down the makeshift aisle, her heart was full, not just with love for Jake, but with a deep sense of gratitude for everything that had led her to this moment. Jake stood at the altar, his eyes fixed on her, his expression a mixture of awe and nervousness. He was clean-shaven for the first time in weeks, wearing a simple brown suit that fit him perfectly, his broad shoulders broadening his already imposing frame. But to Sarah, he wasn't just the man who had offered her a job, or the rancher who had taught her how to live on the land. He was the man who had seen her for who she really was, the woman who had no family left, no future, until she met him. He was the man who had become her home, her anchor. She could see the love in his eyes, the way his breath hitched when he saw her, and it made her heart race with joy. He was everything she needed, everything she had always wanted without even knowing it. As Sarah walked toward him, her steps were slow, measured, as if savoring the moment. The people who had gathered were watching, some with tears in their eyes, others with smiles on their faces. For once, Sarah didn't feel like an outsider. She felt like she belonged. When she reached the altar, Jake took her hands in his grip warm and strong, grounding her in the reality of the moment. The ceremony began with the Reverend's words, simple but powerful, as he spoke of love and commitment, of two souls becoming one. But as they were about to exchange their vows, Martha, who had been sitting at the front, wheeled herself forward, a determined look on her face. She raised her hand. "Wait," she called out. her voice quivering but firm. The entire congregation fell silent as Martha spoke, her voice cracking with emotion. Before you say, "I do," there's something that must be said, something that's been hidden for too long. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. What could Martha possibly have to say now, at the very moment they were about to commit to one another forever? Jake looked at Sarah, his expression a mixture of confusion and concern, but Sarah nodded, signaling for Martha to continue. Martha took a deep breath and began. "I waited a long time for this day, for you both to be together, to find your happiness. But before you two take this step, there's something that you need to know about why Sarah came to us." She paused for a moment, her hands shaking as she held an old, yellowed envelope in her lap. "This letter is from your mother, Sarah. I've kept it all these years hidden away, but today it's time to share it with you." She handed the letter to Sarah, who took it, her hands trembling as she unfolded it. The familiar handwriting on the page sent a wave of emotion rushing over her. It was her mother's handwriting, written so many years ago, yet it still felt as though Rebecca was right there beside her. Sarah began to read aloud, her voice shaking as she read her mother's final words. "My dear Sarah, if you were reading this, it means you've found your way home. I've spent my life regretting the choices I made, the love I ran from. But most of all, I regret not being there for you. I left you with a lie, a story I thought would protect you. But the truth is, you belong here at the ranch with the Coltranes. James loved me, and I loved him. I've carried that love with me every day. I made the wrong choice, and I left, but you were meant to find your way back. When you get there, when you meet Jake's son, you'll understand why this land, why this ranch, is the only place you should ever call home. I hope one day you will forgive me for leaving you with nothing but regret." Sarah's voice caught in her throat as she finished reading. The weight of her mother's words hung heavy in the air. She looked up at Jake, whose eyes were filled with tears. "Your father never stopped loving me, Sarah. He kept a picture of me by his bedside until the day he died," Martha said softly. "He never knew you existed. But when I saw you, I knew. I knew you were meant to be here." Jake's breath caught in his throat as he looked at Sarah, the weight of the truth settling in. His father had loved her mother. He had never stopped. And now, Sarah, his own flesh and blood, was here, standing before him. He reached out and took Sarah's hands, his voice breaking. "You're not just some girl who wandered into my life, Sarah. You're my family, and I will never let you go." The Reverend, who had been standing silently beside them, cleared his throat and nodded. "Now, if you both still wish to go through with this, I believe we have something to finish here." Sarah looked at Jake, his eyes filled with love, with a tenderness that made her heart soar. "I do," she said, her voice strong. Jake nodded, his lips curling into a smile. "I do too." The ceremony resumed, and as they exchanged their vows, Sarah's heart was filled with a peace she had never known. Jake promised to see her for who she was, not for what anyone else had made her out to be. Sarah promised to stay, to fight for their love, to never run from it. They were ready to build a life together, not just for themselves, but for the family that had been lost to them. They had found their way back, and now they would make their own future, free of the past that had once weighed them down. After they exchanged their vows, the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife. The crowd erupted into applause, and Sarah felt Jake's arms wrap around her, pulling her close. Their first kiss as a married couple was soft and sweet, filled with the promise of a future they would build together. The reception that followed was simple but heartfelt. The barn had been converted into a makeshift reception hall, with twinkling lights and long wooden tables covered with food. The Whitmores stood at the back, watching respectfully, but Sarah couldn't bring herself to engage with them just yet. She didn't know if she ever would. But one thing was clear, She had made her choice. Jake had made his. They would build their life on their terms, not on the terms of the people who had once abandoned them. As they danced their first dance, Sarah whispered to Jake, "We did it." He smiled and whispered back, "We did. And now comes the real work." Sarah looked up at him, her heart full of love. "Building a life?" she asked. He nodded. "No, living up to 30 years of expectation." They both laughed, and for the first time, Sarah knew that everything they had fought for, everything they had built, was worth it. The day came to a close, and as the last song played, Martha, who had been quietly watching from her chair, was wheeled onto the makeshift dance floor. Jake took her hand, dancing slowly with her, a tear sliding down his cheek. "Thank you for not giving up," he said. "Thank you for being worth waiting for," she replied. The night ended with Martha calling Sarah over. "There's one more thing," she said. "Come to the house. There's something you need to see." Sarah, exhausted but full of happiness, nodded and followed her grandmother-in-law into the house, wondering what else there could possibly be to discover. 3 days after the wedding, the ranch was alive with activity, but there was an underlying tension that Sarah couldn't shake. The celebrations had ended, and the honeymoon period of their new life together was over. The harsh reality of life on the ranch had set back in, but for the first time, Sarah didn't feel overwhelmed. She had Jake by her side, and she was no longer a stranger to this land. It felt like home, like the life she had been meant to live all along. But amidst all the joy and promise of the future, there was one thing that hung over Sarah's heart like a shadow: Martha's health. The old woman had seemed so frail, so tired ever since the wedding. Sarah couldn't ignore it anymore. Early one morning, as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the windows, Sarah found herself sitting by Martha's side in the small living room. The ranch was quiet now, the hustle of the wedding and the days that followed a distant memory. Martha, who had been so full of life just weeks ago, now looked frilier than ever. Her skin was pale, her breathing shallow. Sarah reached for her hand, the coldness of it sending a wave of fear through her chest. "Martha," she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The older woman opened her eyes, blinking slowly as she looked at Sarah. "I'm tired, dear," she said, her voice thick with exhaustion. "So very tired." Sarah's heart broke at the words, but she kept her composure, holding Martha's hand firmly. "Don't say that. You're strong. You made it this far. You can fight this." Martha gave a weak smile, her eyes softening. "I fought my whole life, Sarah, but sometimes even the strongest people have to rest." Sarah felt the lump in her throat as tears threatened to fall. Martha had been so strong for so many years, strong for Jake, strong for Sarah, strong for the ranch. She had been the glue that held everything together. And now, it seemed like even that strength was slipping away. "You've given us so much, Martha. You've given me a family, a home. You've given Jake a future. You've done more than I could ever repay." Martha's grip tightened around Sarah's hand, a glimmer of emotion flickering in her eyes. "I've done what I promised, child. I brought you home. I saw you married. The story is finished now. You two will be fine. This ranch will live on, just as it was meant to." "You're not done yet," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "We still need you." "No, you don't," Martha replied, her voice gentle but firm. "You've got each other. That's all you need." With that, Martha closed her eyes, and Sarah sat in silence beside her, her hand still holding Martha's, trying to absorb everything the older woman had given her. She knew the time was coming, that it wouldn't be long before Martha's strength ran out. But for now, she would cherish these moments, these final days together. The next few days were a blur of quiet moments, of conversations with Martha, of watching Jake try to hold on to the woman who had been his anchor for so long. They spent hours talking, telling stories about the past, about James, about Rebecca, and about the way the ranch had shaped their lives. Jake and Sarah did everything they could to make Martha comfortable, but there was an inevitable heaviness in the air that neither of them could ignore. On the fourth day after the wedding, Sarah woke to the sound of Jake's voice, calling her name in a frantic tone. She rushed to his side, finding him standing at the foot of the stairs, his face pale. "Martha," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah followed him upstairs, her heart racing in her chest. She found Martha in her bed, her face ashen, her breathing shallow. The old woman had slipped into unconsciousness, her body finally giving out after so many years of fighting. Sarah knelt beside her, holding her hand tightly, feeling the faint pulse. "Martha," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Please stay with us." But it was too late. Martha took one last breath, her body relaxing, and Sarah felt the weight of the moment crash over her. The woman who had given her everything, who had brought her home, was gone. In the hours that followed, Sarah and Jake sat together in silence, holding each other, mourning the loss of a woman who had been so much more than family. She had been a guide, a protector, a mother figure when Sarah had none. They had lost not just a family member, but a part of their past, a part of their future. The funeral was simple, but it was deeply emotional. The whole ranch community gathered to say goodbye to Martha, to honor her life and her legacy. She was laid to rest beside her husband and son in the small family cemetery on the ranch. Sarah placed wildflowers on her grave, the same flowers that had adorned her wedding bouquet just days before. "Thank you for everything," Sarah whispered to the stones. "Thank you for giving me a family. Thank you for showing me how to love." Jake stood beside her, his arm around her waist, and together they looked out over the ranch, over the land that had been passed down through generations. They knew that this was the end of one chapter, but it was also the beginning of another. The Whitmores were there, standing quietly at the back of the crowd, observing from a distance, but Sarah couldn't bring herself to approach them just yet. They had been a part of her life for so long, but now it felt like they were strangers. She wasn't ready to forgive them, not yet, but she knew that, in time, maybe she would. After the service, Sarah and Jake returned to the house, and as they stood in the doorway, the weight of the past seemed to lift just a little. "I'm not ready to call them grandparents yet," Sarah said softly, looking at Jake. "But I think they've earned a place in our lives." Eventually, Jake nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I'm not ready either," he said, "but we'll figure it out together." As the weeks went by, life on the ranch slowly returned to some semblance of normalcy, though it was a new kind of normal. They had lost Martha, but they had gained something else in the process, a deeper understanding of what it meant to be a family, to choose love, to keep going even when the road ahead seemed impossible. And then, one morning, as the sun began to rise, Sarah took Jake's hand and placed it gently on her stomach. He looked at her, his eyes wide with surprise. "Are you?" he asked, his voice trembling. Sarah nodded, tears filling her eyes. "Yes, we're having a baby." Jake's face broke into a wide grin, and without a word, he lifted her off her feet and spun her around, laughing with joy. "This is the best thing ever," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We're going to be a family. Our family." The months that followed were filled with preparation. Sarah worked as a visiting nurse in the nearby rural community, fulfilling her mother's dream of helping others. Jake worked hard on expanding the ranch, building something sustainable for their future. They both knew that their lives had changed forever, but the future was bright. Sarah and Jake stood on the porch one morning, sipping coffee as they watched the sun rise over the ranch. "I've been thinking," Sarah said, her voice soft. "What if it's a girl?" Jake smiled, wrapping his arms around her. If it's a girl, we'll name her Rebecca Martha. Sarah nodded, a smile tugging at her lips. And if it's a boy, James, Jake said, his voice filled with quiet reverence. Perfect, Sarah whispered. They sat together, the peace of the moment surrounding them, and knew that everything had come full circle. The ranch was thriving, the future was secure, and the love that had once been lost had found its way back home. The next day, they took a walk to the family cemetery, their arms around each other as they placed fresh flowers on the graves of Martha, James, and Rebecca. We did it, Sarah said softly. We finished what you started. Jake nodded, his arm around her. Think they're watching? Sarah smiled, her heart full. I know they are. As they walked back to the house, hand in hand, Sarah couldn't help but feel that, despite all the struggles, all the pain, they had found something worth fighting for. A love that refused to die, a future that was theirs to create, and a family that had been waiting for them all along.